What is BIOS UEFI? BIOS and UEFI are two firmware interfaces for computers which work as an interpreter between the operating system and the computer firmware. Both of these interfaces are used at the startup of the computer to initialize the hardware components and start the operating system, which is stored on the hard drive.
What is the difference between UEFI and BIOS? Both UEFI and BIOS are low-level software that starts when you boot your PC before booting your operating system, but UEFI is a more modern solution, supporting larger hard drives, faster boot times, more security features, and, conveniently, graphics and mouse cursors. We've seen newer PCs that ship with UEFI still refer to it as the BIOS to avoid confusing people who are used to a traditional PC BIOS. Even if your PC uses the term BIOS, modern PCs you buy today almost certainly ship with UEFI firmware instead of a BIOS. Is UEFI the same as BIOS? UEFI replaces the traditional BIOS on PCs. You need to buy new hardware that supports and includes UEFI, as most new computers do. Most UEFI implementations provide BIOS emulations, so you can choose to install and boot old operating systems that expect a BIOS instead of UEFI, so they are backwards compatible. What is UEFI and BIOS used for? Both BIOS and UEFI are forms of software that kickstart the hardware of your computer before your operating system loads. UEFI is an update to traditional BIOS that supports larger hard drives, quicker boot times, more security features, and more graphics and mouse cursor options. BIOS. BIOS stands for Basic Input-Output System, the firmware we talked about in the above boot procedure. It is stored on an EEPROM, erasable programmable read-only memory, allowing the manufacturer to push out updates easily. It provides many helper functions that allow reading boot sectors of attached storage and printing things on screen. You can access BIOS during the initial phases of the boot procedure by pressing Del F2 or F10. UEFI. UEFI stands for Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. It does the same job as a BIOS, but with one basic difference. It stores all data about initialization and startup in an EFI file, instead of storing it on the firmware. This EFI file is stored on a special partition called EFI System Partition ESP on the hard disk. This ESP partition also contains the bootloader. To enter BIOS setup at startup, press Delete or F2 during the power on self-test post. If you do not press Delete or F2, post continues with its routines. ISA Mode. By default, the ISA Mode screen appears when you enter the BIOS setup program. The ISA Mode provides you an overview of the basic system information, and allows you to select the display language, system performance mode, fan profile and boot device priority. To access the Advanced Mode, click Advanced Mode F7 or press F7. Advanced Mode. The Advanced Mode provides advanced options for experienced end users to configure the BIOS settings. Device priority is where you set options to boot from your USB or flash drive.